Hello everyone and welcome back. Before we get into these glitch in the Matrix stories, I'd like to thank Swamp Dweller for being in this episode. So if you haven't heard of him already, check him out in the link in the description below. My mother and I teleported, time warped, passed through a portal. I don't even know, but something happened. Some context. I went to pick up my mom from work tonight, and I usually never do this because I don't want to live at home anymore. But she needed a ride today, and I was already at her house spending time with my siblings. So I was like, yeah, I'll go get her. If anyone is from Chicago, I was traveling southbound on Austin coming from Irving Park, and as we were passing up Addison, I asked her what street I'm supposed to turn on. And she was like, it's Wellington, but you have to pass Belmont, which is like maybe 10 blocks away. I kid you not, like 3 blocks pass, and we were all the way the fuck on Diversey. Never passed any of the streets between Addison and Diversey. Just popped up on Diversey. We were both so confused, like how do we go that far so fast?
For the past year or so, I've been noticing that things around me don't seem normal anymore. I continue to have this overwhelming sense that everything is fake, in a way, or almost dreamlike. I've even kicked around the idea that I may have died already and I'm in some sort of state of purgatory. I recently took my family on a weekend getaway to Seattle. Being a couple hundred miles away from our home in Seattle, Washington, it's an easy trip for my wife and I to manage with our 2 kids. One is 11 and the other is 4 months old. Over the course of our weekend excursion, I experienced a few things that I found to be odd and left me feeling a bit uneasy. The first occurrence was trivial enough, but it sort of set the tone for the eeriness of the weekend. I was gazing out of the window of our hotel room on the 12th floor, sipping a cup of coffee, when I noticed a plastic bag drifting in the wind. I watched the bag bounce around and dance in the air as it slowly descended. A green dumpster 12 stories below caught my eye and I immediately thought, what if the bag floated all the way down there and landed in that dumpster? I stood at the window for 5 minutes or so watching this bag slowly float towards the ground, gliding left, right, back and forth. The more I watched the bag, the more confident I became that it would find its way into the dumpster. And it did. This bag that I noticed off in the distance drifted 12 freaking stories and perfectly navigated its way into the dumpster below my building. Later that day, I was in the hotel lobby approaching the elevator to head up to my room. In front of me, there was a man with 2 children waiting for the elevator as well. The man had a guitar case strapped to his back along with an amplifier and various other bags. His back was to me, and he had a hoodie on. For some reason, I thought to myself, what if that's Ed? Ed was a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in years. We used to work at an Olive Garden together in our younger days. We also played guitar together and did a fair amount of partying. Now, here's the weird part. And my wife thinks I'm freaking crazy. But bear with me. The weird part was how confident I was that this guy was going to turn around and it would be Ed. The same confidence, almost certainty, I would say, that I had in the trash bag flying into the dumpster. The elevator doors opened and the man and his 2 children walked inside. As the man turned around to enter the floor, on the elevator button console, it should not have been Ed that I recognized, but you guessed it, it was Ed. We were both thrilled to see each other, and even held the door open to chat for a moment, hindering other folks in the process. Even as this was all occurring though, I couldn't shake this feeling that this isn't real. It's a very difficult thing to describe, but things just didn't feel natural. Later, that evening, my 11-year-old son and I were on the balcony outside of our hotel room. He was peering over the edge when he suddenly whimpered out underneath his breath, "That poor guy." When I asked him who he was talking about, he said, "That bumblebee on the ground next to the dumpster. He's dead." We were on the 12th floor like I mentioned earlier. There is no way this kid could see a dead bumblebee on the ground floor. Not to mention the alleged bee was laying next to the dumpster that was the manifested landing zone for the floating trash bag. We argued a bit over whether or not he could see the bee when he finally convinced me to go down and take a look. As we made our way down to the street level, my thought process shifted. The same confidence that I had previously regarding the trash bag and Ed was back. Although I didn't mention it to my son, I was becoming increasingly certain that this bee would be here. And, well, it was. It was right freaking there, right next to the green dumpster. The next evening, I took my family to a place called GameWorks. It's very similar to Dave & Buster's or an adult version of Chuck E. Cheese. I placed our keys, wallets, and other important stuff into our backpack, and we carried it into the establishment. We spent a couple of hours playing games before finally counting our tickets and claiming prizes at the prize booth. We pocketed the prizes and went down the block to the Cheesecake Factory for dinner. After being seated for a few moments, my wife realizes that I do not have the backpack on. The backpack containing all of our money, credit cards, car keys, and not to mention food and supplies for our 4-month-old baby. The bizarre thing is that I have no recollection of ever taking the bag off. Apparently I did because it was gone, but I could have sworn up and down that I never took it off. I immediately go into panic mode, leap up from the table, and take off towards the GameWorks establishment. I run inside, dart around frantically for about a minute or two with the bag nowhere in sight. Finally, I calm down and focus. After breathing and focusing for a moment, I am greeted with the same confidence that I mentioned before. I was confident I would not leave that place without my bag. At that moment, a man approached me waving his arms in the air and calling me by my first name. He said, "Here, Cody, I've got your bag, man. Now get back to the Cheesecake Factory and enjoy your dinner." I was awestruck and definitely beside myself at that moment, as I had no freaking clue who this man was or how he knew my name or where I was eating dinner. I didn't even think to question the man. I just reached out, grabbed the bag, and left. This might seem coincidental to a lot of you, but these are just recent examples of how my life unfolds daily. Either I am a walking conduit of coincidence, or something larger is at play. My wife thinks I'm nuts, but things are definitely not as they used to be. I don't know exactly how or why, but they just aren't. Things just don't seem real.
I hope I'm posting in the right thread. If not, then please kindly point me in the right direction, as I'm desperate for some answers or someone who's experienced something similar. About a week and a half ago, me, my manager, and another colleague of mine were driving around at 1 a.m. to try and find somewhere we could get some food at a drive-thru. Every 24-hour McDonald's appeared to be closed, so we ended up driving 30 minutes away to try and find something somewhere that was open. Eventually, we gave up and pulled up at a service station around 2 a.m. It was eerily quiet, and we weren't even sure if it was open due to COVID, but we got out to check anyways. We walked into the doors, and it was mostly shut apart from toilets in a small shop, with one lonely worker sat behind a till. All the fast food places were shut, lights off. We used the toilet, and my manager recalled that she'd actually been there before, and there was another part of the service station across a bridge that could be open, so we went off to search for it. We found the walkway connecting to the bridge up 2 flights of stairs. The bridge was covered with windows surrounding the outside, showing a view of the motorway beneath. My manager said that the bridge was giving her the creeps, and I had to agree. It was long and narrow and dimly lit, with nobody else around. We decided to run as fast as we could to the other side. Honestly, it was unsettling. We made our way down the stairs at the end, and were met with dead silence. Once again, we were faced with closed restaurants and dim lighting. There wasn't a single other person around, and we were walking aimlessly around a large, unoccupied space, a feeling of unease settling in. We couldn't take much more of the creepiness, so we ran back up the stairs, back across the bridge as fast as we could possibly manage. We caught our breath once we were back to the other side, and commented on how strange the area had been. After that, we got snacks from the single open shop, and walked back to the car to have a smoke. It's worth mentioning that the bridge and part of the service station were badly affected by a fire a few years ago and rebuilt. I remember the news stories about it. But the odd chilling feeling remained with us. We all agreed that we felt as though a lot of time had passed, despite the whole thing taking around 20 minutes. The car park was empty and the air felt off, like the pressure had shifted. That's the best way I can describe it. We went home after that and tried to sleep it off. But when we woke up, things still weren't the same. Since then, the world has felt off to all of us. Colors look different. Nothing feels normal or right. Things are the same and yet completely different. It's hard to describe. Life just feels more like a dream, and we all have a sense of being there in our day-to-day life, but not being present. We struggle to connect our minds to our physical bodies and be present in the moment. It sounds crazy, but it's been a very real experience for all three of us. We all agree that this started when we left the service station that night. Then the really weird thing happened tonight, and this is the moment I decided to hop on Reddit and try and get some clarity. So far, Google has nothing for me. Anyway, tonight, we were dealing with some pretty morbid stuff with a friend of ours that's suffering with her mental health badly. We left her with the police, and my manager and my colleague and I set off driving home. We discussed that night at the service station again, noting that all of the bad things that were happening with our friend and her mental health started after that. Other unpleasant events had followed as well, and we pondered the significance of our creepy adventure and the bad things that were happening now. I said it's like since that night, nothing has been the same. And then something weird happened. We both started crying simultaneously, as if someone had turned a tap on for both of us. Water started leaking out of our eyes at exactly the same time, and we were so freaked. I felt the wave of sadness and emotion, but it wasn't enough to make me cry, and my colleague never cries, ever. We are sure now more than ever that something happened that night. We just don't know what. We've joked about ending up in another dimension, and I don't normally believe anything like that. But this has me questioning because I'm honestly convinced that something isn't right. That we've encountered something that's changed all three of us. We just don't know what. Even as I write this, I feel off and a tad tearful. I have no idea why. I also forgot to mention a few other things when I wrote this post in a rush the other night. It's worth telling you that my manager has been experiencing intense deja vu every single day since then. She has strong feelings that she's experienced certain events before. The most prominent being that night we discovered a friend having the crisis. We drove to her flat, which we'd never been in before, and ran to her as fast as we could, fearing the worst. I remember my manager bursting through her door and running up a flight of stairs, across a corridor and into her living room. She didn't hesitate. It's like she knew exactly where we would find our friend, and was familiar with the surroundings, as if she'd been there before, but she never had. When we asked her about it later on, she said she just knew. She felt as though she'd been in there in a dream before, and the block of flats wasn't unfamiliar to her, it was creepy. I also had something similar, but not as drastic. My passport has been missing for a whole year now. I'm lazy, so I didn't cancel it. I feel as though I've searched everywhere possible for this damn passport, and it never showed up. I was beginning to think it had been stolen. Then the other day, just as I was lying in bed, I got a sudden bizarre feeling come over me, and I got almost like a brainwave telling me exactly where my passport was. I got up and went there, and of course there it was, in a bag I'd searched 100 times before. It's also worth mentioning that the night of the crying incident, we had been observing the moon just minutes beforehand. It was unusually large and brown in color. We commented on how insane it looked, and then the crying thing happened shortly after. I believe it could be related. Anyways, thank you for reading my waffle. If you made it this far, I really do appreciate the support and suggestions you've all given me, especially as people in real life think we're insane. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. This happened in December of 2020. Backstory. On December 11th, 2004, my grandfather passed away. I was 13. Almost immediately, the 3 sons and 3 daughters tore the family in two and continued to feud. In February of 2011, my grandmother passed away while I was deployed overseas. I was 20 at this time. After her death, the 3 sisters sold off the house and hoarded the family recipes and heirlooms. I only wanted one thing. I wanted my grandfather's dog tags. Being the only grandchild to serve in the military, it was something that meant something to me. Sadly, I was told that I would not appreciate them and was essentially dismissed, so I never asked for anything else. After I was honorably discharged from the United States Marine Corps, I pursued a career as a chef. Over time, I started to really want to recover certain family recipes. I had cut ties with the family because I wasn't going to pick sides, and I either wanted the family to be together, or I didn't want to be a part of it. I haven't been in contact in years. My last contact was in August of 2013, when barely any of the family attended my wedding. So here's the story. The first week of December, I was talking with my brother. I only keep contact with him and my father. My brother mentioned how awesome it would have been to have the recipe for my grandparents' zucchini relish. They made it fresh with ingredients from the garden, jarred it, and it was a big hit with the family. A few days later, I was writing a letter to accompany some recipes that I was sending to a friend for Christmas. I wrote the letter while I was taking a ferry ride to an island I was to work on that day. When I finished the letter, I tucked it into a pouch that I had never used on my backpack. The pouch is basically where your back meets the pack. It's open at the top and it is quite narrow. The letter remained there until the end of the week. Friday, December 11th, 2020. I return home after work and immediately reach into that small, narrow pouch while focused on getting my house key ready. I pull out a piece of weathered paper. Confused as this isn't the letter, I am now focused on this paper while thinking to myself, what the hell? The paper is weathered, written in a blue ink, which reminded me of the blue cheap pens my grandfather kept around the house. And the handwriting is vaguely familiar. I proceed to read, and a chill goes right up my spine. It's the zucchini relish recipe that my brother and I had talked about days prior. I immediately message him, and he tells me to look at the date. It is 12/11. In other words, it is the anniversary of my grandfather's death, and one of my grandparents' recipes spontaneously appears in an unlikely place. I audibly thanked my grandfather as I walked into my house with the recipe in hand. Even more eerie is the fact that my brother has told me that the 3 daughters do not have possession of this recipe, and yet here it is in my possession. It's one thing to discuss something and social media shows ads for the exact same thing. It's another to discuss something personal and have it spontaneously appear in an unlikely place by extraordinary means. Sock returns from the other dimension after being lost for months. I know what you're thinking based on the title, but let me explain myself. This past Christmas, my older sister got me some funny socks that say, "Hide it in my sock." Lost sock randomly appears right when I decide to wash the other sock, since it's been on my floor for a while. It's not my type of humor, but hey, free socks. So, after wearing them, I put them in the wash like anyone else. And I know socks have a tendency to go missing to God knows where, so I always try to fold my socks into each other before going into the washer and dryer. All my socks come out of the washer still folded into each other, but wait, where the heck is my second sock? I check the washer, rotate it around a couple of times to see if it's stuck somewhere inside. I check the whole laundry load thinking it's in a pant leg or sweater sleeve. No dice. I check the washer again, and this time, in the rubber seam in between the door and the drum, where coins usually build up. Still, no second sock. I just blow it off since it's a weird color sock and doesn't really match my wardrobe. After months of having the lonely sock sit on my bed frame, just in case the second one pops back up, I decide to add it to my morning laundry load. As I open up my washer, lo and behold, my second hide it in my sock is just sitting in the washer drum. I live alone, so only I use the washer and dryer, and I always rotate the drum after every load, just to make sure I got everything. How come, after months of laundry, does my lost sock appear right when I decide to wash the other sock? My mind is blown over a sock. This is the first time I've experienced any kind of real glitch. Past things that may have just been my brain playing tricks on me. This is something truly unexplainable to me, and my friend and I are still stumped. This happened probably less than 6 months ago. I go to a university in a big-ish city. Think something around the size of Albany, New York. I don't live in Albany though. We have student ID cards that are very useful. We use them as key cards to get into the buildings on campus, as well as to our rooms. So basically, if we don't have our student ID, we're fucked. Sometime around late autumn of last year, my friend and I decided to take an Uber further into the city, just so we could walk around in the evening and have some fun. I think it was her birthday at the time. I distinctly remember bringing my student ID out of my room with me and into the vehicle. Since I was sliding it in and out of the thing, I used to hold it as a fidget. I don't remember having the card when I got out of the car. I don't remember having it for the rest of the night. And I don't remember having it when I got into the Uber to come back home. As soon as we get to the building my friend and I both live in, I realize I don't have the ID. So I had one of my roommates let me into my room to look for it. Nothing. Nada. My room is very tiny. It's 4 people living in a suite with separate bedrooms. So there's not exactly a ton of places I can look. And I turned up the whole place. I went to my friend's room to spend the night, since we'd already planned that. My friend and I, through extensive conversation and recollection of events, figured that I probably dropped it into the Uber. I made a plan to get a new one, and I decided to deal with it the next morning. The next morning comes and nothing really happens. Just me being angry and calling my dad to see if I have to get a new one. While I'm waiting to hear back from the office of the university that deals with replacing student ID cards, I went back to my room and had my roommates let me in. My student ID was sitting on my desk, face up, in broad daylight. When I was looking for it the night before, I had every light on in my room available, since it was probably around midnight, and I could not see it. I can't remember if I had my friend helping me look, but I might have. We definitely would have seen it. At least I didn't have to pay for a new one.